Hello everybody, welcome back to High Ground. My name is Tanner, and today we're going to be going over 5 players to keep your eye on at the Montreal Major for Rainbow Six Siege. So we're going to start in Phase 1. I'll pick 5 players here, and then I'll also pick 5 players from Phase number 2. The reason I'm separating these, there is a good chance that any given player from Phase number 1 won't advance to Phase 2, and then for a lot of the teams, even if they do make it into Phase number 2, I wouldn't say they have the best chance of making a deep run, so I prefer to keep my main list to mostly the top teams in Phase 2 that are expected to make it through Phase 2 into the Phase 3, and so yeah, I'll do a bunch of smaller picks, honorable mentions, whatever you want to call them, but let's start in Phase number 1 here. On G2, certainly the ones to watch are Blaz and Loira, and in particular, I'm going to go with Loira. I think we haven't seen the full potential come out from him on G2. He's looked good at times, but it just looked like he hasn't really meshed with the team fully. Hopefully that's not a thing that persists over time. Hopefully he gets over it quickly, because I think he could be the most impactful player on the team. For CL4L, I think it's hard to pick anybody except for Uzi, the guy who's subbing in and the guy that probably will be make or break. I think they have the potential to make it into Phase number 2, but a lot of that will hinge on how well Uzi meshes with them in terms of culture and playstyle. If I was going to pick anybody from the main roster, I think it would be Adam, though. I feel like he's probably the best player on the team, so maybe if Uzi does mesh well, then the next factor might come in with how well Adam can pop off in matches. I'm gonna go with Uzi though for the second pick in Phase number 1. On Black Dragons, maybe Hornetow in some world, but I think I'm gonna go with Ask. I feel like they'll lean on him because he's the only player on this team with major experience, and he was also, I think, their best performing player, if I remember right, in this most recent stage. But I'm gonna go with Ask from Black Dragons as another big one to watch. He's also a player on one of the teams that I think is more likely to make it out of Phase number 1. On Cyclops, I couldn't really say. I'm not gonna pick any of these as a top 5. If I was going to pick one from Cyclops, I think I'd probably say Anakin or Blackray. Fear X, same sort of case. Really don't know who I would pick. I'm not picking any of them for top 5. I guess I'd go with Rin. I think that's probably the highest profile player. Once upon a time, he was one of the sort of star players in the whole world back when he played on Damwon. For Chiefs, I think I'm gonna go Jigsaw. I think there's a cool through line with Oda being that former Bliss player who had played at a bunch of majors with Bliss, and now he went to another team and he took their major spot. But I feel like just as a player, I'm gonna say Jigsaw. On Falcons, they have the Dovahkiin and Guards. They're twin brothers. I don't know if one of them performed significantly better than the other, so I'm not gonna pick either of them. I think Hisham is probably the one to watch for Falcons, and then I don't know anything about these guys, to be quite honest. So 5 players from Phase number 1 to keep your eye on. We have Loira, Uzi, Ask, Jigsaw, and Hisham. Okay, let's move on to Phase number 2 for the actual top 5 list now. All right, we have 12 teams in Phase number 2, and I need to narrow that down to not just 5 teams, but 5 players. I won't pick 2 players from the same team. That would be a little bit boring, but I will talk about my reasoning and other players that I might pick from any given team. So starting with BDS here, Shaiko and Leakback are probably the 2 that really jump out to people. Shaiko, one of the biggest names in the history of Rainbow Six Esports, and Leakback over the time he's been on BDS, but especially in the last handful of months, this year in particular, he has become a real household name, being arguably the MVP of Manchester, not just for his team, but for the entire event. Obviously, Gunnar was deserving of the title, but just because of how much better Leakback was than the rest of his team in the grand final, it felt like he was almost single-handedly going to drag his team across the line to first place. He was also the best player for them at Esports World Cup. His performance in Europe this stage wasn't as impressive, but of course, he was great the last 2 times internationally, and here we are internationally again. Shaiko got his mojo back seemingly after not having a great Manchester. He was really good in Europe this stage, but I'm gonna give it to Uzis. I think underrated. On any other team, this guy wouldn't be underrated. He was, I think, clearly the best player on M&M. Maybe not clearly. I think him and Solotov were really back and forth in that regard, but he has sort of quietly been extremely impressive his entire time on BDS. He was the second highest rated player at the last 3 things that we're talking about. So Europe and Esports World Cup and Manchester. So he was second behind Leakback twice and second behind Shaiko once because of his consistency and maybe being a little bit underrated just because of the other names on his team. I'm going to go with Uzis there. I'm not going to pick anybody on Secret. There are some picks you could go with here. I would probably opt for Joom if I was going to pick one to watch on Secret. On Veris Pro, Pasha was actually the highest rated player in the entirety of Europe, so he's a pretty good shout, but I think he just narrowly misses out on the list for me. Dan's another really consistent performer for Veris Pro in general, he's another good pick. I think you have to pick a player from Sonics, and I think it could be just about anybody. Canadian and Surf are the new players on the team. So Canadian, maybe you don't always look at him for his raw performance in game as the most impactful team. It's his presence as an IGL and as a leader. I think Surf would be a good pick, but I actually want to go with Ambi. He ended up as the best player in North America. He was good in the regular stage, but he really popped off in playoffs, particularly in the grand final, that 45 rounder against Dark Zero, where he tied the kill record. So great stuff from him. And this is actually only his second international event. His debut was at Six Invitational. That was not only his international debut, but his debut in general. And he had a so-so performance. I think it was reasonable given it that was his first event, but now he's played with this team for a longer amount of time, and obviously not this exact team because Canadian and Surf just joined, but he's played with Rexon and Grixer for a time, and he just has more tier 1 experience in general. So given all of that, I think Ambi is the player to watch, and he could potentially be the most impactful player in Sonic's run if they are to make a deep run at this event. And then Dark Zero, NJR, Pamazoo, Bolo, Nafe, they've all been on the roster long enough. I don't think I'd pick any of them. Kobilax, I think for me is the one to watch though, not because he was fantastic recently, but sort of for the opposite reason. He had some good performances, but he's been shaky overall, and a lot of people were telling me that I was crazy for putting Dark Zero a tier below Sonics in my tier list for this event. I think I had them at the top of A tier, Sonics were at the bottom of S tier, but Kobilax for me will be the difference maker. I assume these other guys will put up good to great performances, and Kobilax will need to match that, or maybe even be the star of the show if Dark Zero wants to make a really deep run at this event, like a grand final level run, because they had a lot of top 8, top 4 type finishes with the previous team with Canadian, but you know, it's time for them to prove that getting rid of Canadian for this new player was the right move. Space Station, I don't think I want to pick anyone here. Space Station, always a fun team to watch. They have some great players. J9O, Ashen, and Benjamaster, one of the scariest fragging trios in the world. Ashen has been phenomenal pretty much his whole time on Space Station. Maybe he was a little bit shaky at the beginning, but I think he's proven himself to clearly be one of the best players in North America, if not one of the best players in the whole world, but he sort of narrowly misses out on the list for me. FaZe Clan, they have a lot of great players, and they're actually a weird team in that it's generally the fraggers that are the less exciting ones to me. Cyber and KDS. It's Souls and Handy and sometimes Vidiking that are putting up the real numbers. Handy and Souls in particular, almost always putting up phenomenal stats, but my pick is going to be Vidiking. Absolutely insane stage from him. He was the highest rated player on his team. That's an abnormality in itself. Handy and Souls weren't too far behind. They were all 3 next to each other in the ratings. Vidiking is the main support player on the team. He's the IGL. You generally don't expect him to put up good numbers, but he put up the numbers he did, mainly playing Habana and Smoke. Absolutely insane. And FaZe, they haven't been as scary at the last few events, Manchester and Esports World Cup, as they were at SI. But I feel like this is the scariest they've looked to me since SI, where they made it all the way to the grand final, where they were a single round away from being SI champions. So Handy would be a really good shout. I think Souls would as well, but I'm actually going to give it to Vidiking. And Liquid, a bunch of good picks here. I think Palu and Maya, probably the most solid picks for players to watch, but I don't want to go with any of these guys. W7M, Volps, he's probably number 6 for me. And honestly, he should probably be number 5. I should probably be going with him. He put up like a 1.29 rating. This guy pops off so often. He didn't really work out on Liquid. I think that was just a matter of the playstyle. He didn't fit in that well. He was obviously great when he was on W7M, not this one, but the old W7M. And then he went over to Liquid, never really fit in. And now he's back on W7M, this new one. He's looked fantastic. He was the highest rated player, maybe not in the entire world. I didn't check all of the regions, but certainly for the main regions of North America, Europe, and Brazil. Absolute menace. So really close, but I excluded him. I think I just wanted to spice things up a bit. My final pick is actually going to be Nina here on Scars. They're not really a team that I would say to look out for. Maybe they make a little bit of a run. They've made a top 8 before, sort of surprising people. I don't have the highest hopes, but Nina has proven himself time and time again to be an absolute menace. He's like the highest rated player in the entire world across all regions for the last year. Of course, he is playing in Japan, one of the notably weaker regions in the game, so that certainly makes getting your stats up a lot easier. But he was also the highest rated player at Esports World Cup. Yes, they only played 5 maps compared to BDS only played like 10 maps, even though they won the whole thing. So a little bit smaller of a sample size, but still crazy performance. not only highest rated player at Esports World Cup, but like I said, also in the world. And we've also seen him put up crazy numbers at other majors. I think when he was on a previous team, he was also the highest rated player at another major. Also another small sample size, but just the numbers this guy puts up are crazy. I feel like if he can get proper backup, you know, if Fishlike and Taiyu can really pull up one major and back him up, Scars could potentially make a good run, especially off the back of him and Rex, another really impressive player. That leaves D+ and Elevate that I didn't talk about at all, but I think these are the teams to look out for the least in phase number 2. Quick little recap. I went with Uzus and Ambi and Kobe Lax, Vidiking, and Nina. Yeah, those are my 5 picks for players to watch in phase number 2 and presumably phase number 3. Maybe not Nina, but hopefully, probably we'll see the other 4 players in phase number 3. Okay, that's gonna do it for me. Let me know if you have your own list, if you think anybody definitely should have been on this list or definitely should not be on this list, and I will catch you guys next time.